Hello, my name is Natalie, and a year ago everything in my family changed completely because it turns out that my father had an illegitimate son. One day I was at home while my parents were still at work. Someone knocked on the door. I opened it, and there stood a grandma and a little boy. He was like 5 years old. The boy waved to me and ran into the house. I was confused, and this old woman explained that he would stay for a couple of hours, that my parents would be fine with it, and that I should look after him. I was like, what? But this mysterious grandma was already leaving. Okay, I guess. The boy's name was Joshua, and he was a very nice and well-behaved boy. I played with him for a while and made him a sandwich. He kept asking me, when will Daddy come home? I was super confused. I called my parents, and they didn't answer at first. But then my dad finally answered, and he was not happy to hear about what had happened. Soon my parents came home, and they looked at this kid like he was some kind of mythical creature. They were just staring at him. They went into the kitchen area, completely ignored the kid, and started whispering. My mum was extremely angry, and my dad was basically panicking. They tried to keep it quiet, but it was clear that something weird was happening. At some point, Joshua shyly made his way toward my father and asked him, "Are you my daddy?" He continued to ask him questions, but Dad just kept staring at the boy. It was like he was scared of him. Mum was covering her face with her hand in embarrassment. Joshua tried to hug my dad, but instead of hugging him back, Dad was stiff and not really responding in any way. He was just standing there. Joshua got upset and confused, and he kept looking at me and Dad and Mum. I felt sorry for him, but most of all, I was trying to figure out what was really happening. Soon the old lady returned to take poor confused Joshua home. My mum was so angry that she could barely look at the old woman, but she was trying to hide it. My father raised his voice at her, asking what she thought she was doing. She calmly answered, "You should take responsibility for your actions. If you want to see your son, here is my address." She gave him a piece of paper and left. Joshua waved his hand to all of us in desperation, but I was the only one who waved back at him. I immediately asked a bunch of questions, but my parents were ignoring me, continuing to quietly argue with each other. My mum took the paper with the address from my father, crumpled it, and threw it into the trash. After that, she went into her room, and Dad followed, ignoring any questions I had. I went to my room and tried to listen to my parents through a wall, but let's be honest, it was clear what happened. I couldn't believe that my father could cheat. Knowing I wouldn't get any answers from my parents, I picked up the address from the trash. A few days later, I went to the old lady's house. She had the same face as before. She was always calm and collected. I asked her if I could see my brother, and she nodded. When I went to Joshua's room, he was super happy to see me, and he hugged me. He was such a sweet boy. He immediately started to show me all of his toys and drawings, and we played games, and it was very sweet, except for the parts when he would ask uncomfortable questions like, "When will Daddy come? Are you my sister? Was that my mum?" I liked playing with him, but I couldn't give him any answers to his questions. Finally, he was so tired he fell asleep. The old woman asked if I wanted some tea, and I decided that it was a good time to finally find out what happened. I was ready to ask her so many questions, but she decided to tell me everything herself without trying to hide any details. It turns out that my father had had an affair with her daughter, who was in her 20s. I was shocked because I never knew anything about this. But I suddenly remembered how my parents were stressed and angry about 5 years ago. My mum definitely knew about it. So their affair ended when this woman got pregnant, and my father didn't want anything to do with it. The woman herself was broken by this, and she never wanted the child, so she moved somewhere else without leaving a trace. She didn't even tell her mother where she was going. Stubborn as she was, the old woman decided to raise her grandson herself and not contact my father in any way. Well, together with her husband. She got a bit more emotional when she was talking about him. He was a very kind-hearted person, but he died a few months ago, and it was too difficult to raise a kid all by herself. So she reluctantly decided she would finally contact my father because she needed help. Of course, she wouldn't ask for it directly. It just wasn't her style. As I was walking home, I was so shocked by all of this. My father wasn't the person I thought he was. I looked up to him, and now he seemed like someone completely different. But I believed that he would do the right thing, so I decided to talk with him. When he was home, alone, I asked him how he could cheat on my mother and how he could leave his son alone, like that. He didn't know Joshua's mother left, and he wanted to concentrate on our family, but everything he said was just excuses. I was disappointed in my father, but wanted to give him a second chance. I told him that now he could take care of this boy because he clearly needed a father. My dad agreed, but he clearly didn't want to do it at all. He said that he would spend some time with Joshua, but not in this crazy woman's house, so instead he would go and see him at playgrounds and parks. Joshua was always happy to see my father, and he was always trying to talk to him or play with him. And my father tried, but it wasn't really genuine. Sometimes he would stay at our house, but only when my mother wasn't home. She didn't want to see Joshua, or even hear about him. I guess it was too painful for her, because this little boy was a reminder of my dad's infidelity. I felt sorry for Joshua, because he was such a sweet little boy, but it got even worse. Pretty soon my father stopped seeing Joshua, and even me, and my mum. He always stayed late at his job because he had so much work to do. Everyone knew it was a lie because he had never done that before, but we never talked about it at all. Mum was acting like everything was all right, but I could see how heartbroken she was. I continued to see Joshua because I felt so guilty. He was my half-brother after all, and he was always happy to see me, but a little disappointed that his daddy wasn't around, and he wasn't always allowed in our house anymore because my mum had forbidden it. She hated him. One day we were playing at a playground not far from our house, and Joshua fell into a big puddle. He was soaking wet from head to toe and needed a change of clothing immediately. I had no choice but to go home and ask my mum for it. When we arrived and I asked my mum, she refused and said he should get a change of clothing at his own house, which was like an hour from ours. I tried to make Mum change her mind, but she kept saying no. It was painful to hear, especially for Joshua. He couldn't understand why she was against it, and why she wouldn't even look at him while she was talking. The whole way home, he was extremely upset and cold. We couldn't take a taxi, so we had to take the bus. As we were rushing to finally get Joshua home, he suddenly stopped and started doing something in the grass. After a minute, he gave me a bouquet of dandelions and asked me to give it to my mum because he thought he had upset her somehow. I couldn't believe how kind he was and that he thought that it was his fault somehow. I was never like this when I was 5. Afterwards, I headed home. I gave my mum the bouquet, saying Joshua wanted me to give it to you. She looked at it for a long time without touching it, with a weird look on her face. Afterward, she took them and threw them into the trash. I was upset because I watched Joshua collect them while he was wet and freezing cold. In the evening, as I walked by the trash can, I noticed that the dandelions weren't there anymore. After this, my mum started to tolerate Joshua. She would let him stay in our house at first, then she started cooking for him, and in just a month's time, she was talking with him a lot. She still struggled, and it was still hard for her to look at him, but she was realising that it wasn't Joshua's fault. I was extremely happy to see all of this. My father, on the other hand, didn't like it at all. When he found out that Mum started to like Joshua, he was angry. He would tell her that she did it just to spite him, to remind him of what he had done. She didn't even try to answer to him, because by this point she had lost all the respect she had for him. Then my father forbade us to see Joshua because he was his son. I didn't want to tolerate my parents never listening to or answering me, so I started to share my thoughts. After another argument, I barged in and shouted at my dad, "You don't even care about Joshua. You don't care about anybody except yourself." And every time he would say, "Stay out of it." And Mum would just basically ignore him. She was tired. After all this time, she finally decided to share what she thought with me after all these months of silence. She wanted to get a divorce with my father. She forgave him for cheating because she needed him in the family. But now, seeing him running away from his responsibilities and blaming everyone around him for them, she didn't want to anymore. She was very sorry for treating Joshua badly, but she couldn't look at him without remembering what my father did. It was hard for me because I still loved my father. I still believed that he could be better. Then he finally came to me, but it was far from him trying to be better. He told me that he cheated because my mum didn't respect or love him anymore. Begged me to go with him when they got the divorce. I remembered Joshua and how much he wanted to see his father, and it made me feel sick because I felt the same. He was never home, so I refused. At least my mum tried. Later I found out that he tried to take Joshua away, but his grandma wouldn't let him, and even called the police. It was so funny how hard he tried now, when he realised that nobody needed him anymore. Well, they got divorced, and I have seen him once or twice since then. I see Joshua regularly, though. He often stays at our house, and we both love him. He even calls Mum, Mum. She smiles every time he does that, although it still hurts when he asks where's Daddy. And I don't know where he is. I mean, in his life. But I still hope that he will change, and all of it still hurts. This was a long story, so thanks for listening. Tell me what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.